20 years, 30 years. Raises the question about. But concerns from mine.
Good.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. We're going to call the meeting of the Zoning Advisory Council to order. We'll start with a roll call. Mr. Gates.
Here.
Mr. Hart.
Here.
Mr. Lloyd. Mr. Mai. Mr. Menges.
Here.
Ms. Overton. Ms. Peachin here. Mr. Pitt.
Here.
Mr. White.
Here.
Councilwoman Robertson. Mr. Lloyd.
Here.
And we have a couple requests for virtual participation from Dr. Creedle, Charlie Wilson, and Kendra Norrell, excuse me. So we'll need each of them to announce why they are requesting to participate virtually, and then we'll need a motion and approval for them to participate. So we'll start with Kendra Norrell first. Kendra, if you could just state why you're participating virtually, please.
Yes, I have a work commitment that interfered with my time to get there.
Great, thank you, Kendra. Need a motion?
So moved.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Great. Welcome, Kendra. Dr. Creedle, are you on the line? Okay, we will, Dr. Creedle, if you do hop on, if you could somehow maybe raise your hand so we know to motion you in.
I have to.
Okay, is he on?
You should be able to now.
Okay, Dr. Creedle, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Good afternoon, everybody.
Noon. If you could just briefly state why you're requesting to participate virtually.
Yes, we are undergoing some house renovations, and so I'm currently not in the area.
Great, thank you. We'll need a motion to approve Dr. Creedle's request.
So moved.
And a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, welcome, Dr. Creedle. And then the last one is from Charlie Wilson.
Yes, I am unfortunately unable to join you all today as I am the best man in a wedding. That's kind of a full-time job for the rest of the week. I'm in New Hampshire right now.
Great. Well, hope you're having good weather and a good wedding. We could get a motion to accept Mr. Wilson's request. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. All right. Thanks, Charlie. So I want to thank you again for joining us today. And just a reminder that the Advisory Council is a subcommittee of the City Planning Commission. We are charged with advising the Planning Commission, the Department of Planning and Development Review, and the consultant team on the zoning ordinance revision process. The public will have an opportunity to speak during the public comment period on items that are not on the agenda. And as a reminder to the council members, when you are speaking, please speak loudly and state your name at the beginning of your comments so the folks participating virtually can hear us and know who is speaking. So the next order of business is to approve the August meeting notes, which you all should have received over email. Are there any questions? If not,
Motion to approve. Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. So with that, we'll move over to the public comment period. And again, this is the time for the public to offer comments on items that are not on the agenda. We'll have 3 minutes for individual speakers, 5 minutes for those representing a group or organization. I would ask that we be polite in our comments, and for those in the audience, hold applause or any commentary and be respectful to those that are at the podium. So we'll start with those that are at the room first. If you would come forward and please announce your name.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Rachel Hefner. I'm a lead organizer with New Virginia Majority, and also a part of the Richmond Housing Justice Collective that's been working together to try to bring some community voices to this space. I'm here today to speak on the issue of displacement and this rezoning process. At the last zoning advisory committee meeting in August, a member of this committee claimed that anti-displacement zoning overlays are not legal in Virginia and that the zoning codes cannot account for potential involuntary displacement in zoning decisions. This claim is blatantly false. Members of the public and press look to this committee for factually accurate information and expertise on the rezoning. So for those on this committee to use the platform to spread blatant misinformation is abuse of power, especially when the members of this committee use a false front of inaccurate legal reasoning from their profession to express their feelings. Involuntary displacement by being priced out has life-altering impacts on people and broader communities. The city needs to take the necessary time to ensure everyone on this committee and our committee know exactly what can be done to combat displacement. We need transit and we need more housing, period. What we do not need is for this body and others who are solely pushing development to see parts of our city as expendable to what we all know is coming our way as development that doesn't work for the people who currently live here. No, not only can the city do something about displacement in the zoning, but this city has the obligation to do something. Change is inevitable, justice is not. You all must do everything in your power to ensure the zoning code is just and does not further any kinds of displacement. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Please come forward.
Afternoon. I'm Meg Lawrence, and I live in Ginter Park. And what I wanted to mention today was the language in the Richmond 300 that talks about great streets. And there's even a map and shows the great streets. And then it gives the example of a great beautiful street, which is Ash Boulevard, south of Broad Street, which is an entirely residential street, except for the parcels right up at Broad Street. It talks about the trees, the wide sidewalks, buildings that address the street, and then goes on to say that when you travel north towards 95 and 64, the splendor is diminished. And what strikes me about that is that when I look at the current draft zoning map, which people keep telling me is a draft, and so I'm choosing to believe that, for the blocks of Chamberlain that are in Ginter Park, and I look at the allowed use table, I am wondering how the language of the master plan is being followed, saying that the beauty of Ash Boulevard should be replicated, because, you know, Ash Boulevard, when you cross Broad Street, isn't beautiful. Sign shop, auto repair, gas stations, convenience stores, dry cleaners, fast foods, a gym, a car wash. Those are all uses that could go on that part of Chamberlain Avenue. So we already have a boulevard with trees, we have street trees, we have sidewalks. It's very walkable, schools and churches. I fail to see how the by right uses in your use plan, your use table, support replicating the beauty of Ash Boulevard, a residential street, on my residential street, Chamberlain Avenue.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having us. My name is Catherine Harold, and I'm a resident in the 4th District. And I've lived there for probably 45 years, I guess. I appreciate the ability to come down here and speak before you guys. My comments are more directed at some specific areas in the 4th District. And these are 2 large parcels behind the Publix and Target off of Forest Hill Avenue. It is almost landlocked currently by Hope Parkway on the south end, Chippenham Parkway on the north side, the Publix Target, development, the north side, and on the east side is a residential neighborhood. I think it's called Granite, and the two parcels are divided by the Norfolk Southern Railroad. They're owned by the same people, this parcel, a developer. The two parcels are bisected by environmentally sensitive areas, specifically an RPA, which is a perennial stream, and a forested wetland, which is forested most of the year, plus the 100-foot buffer on either side of that. So a fairly substantial RPA up through the center of this. And then on either side of that and surrounding it is a 500-foot wide resource management area. And there are protective standards for both categories of sensitive areas. So nearly the entire site is a Chesapeake Bay protected area to some extent. The city, it's currently zoned as R2, and the city is planning to rezone it for multi-use housing RA-A. So I don't think that's appropriate. This is also on the National Wetland Inventory map and has been for decades. Keeping it as R2 would still retain reasonable development rights if they put R2 in there, and then it would have access through the Granite neighborhood on that side of the railroad. I just don't see how you would put multi-housing residential in there and all the associated paved surfaces that go along with that on that property. So I'm here just to ask you, bring it to your attention, and to ask you to abandon the idea of rezoning these parcels from residential to RAA. And I have copies of the maps that show this. So you can see a darker green area here, and then a lighter green area. That's almost essentially the whole parcel. And then I have an MWI map attached as well. So this is for your records, and I'm going to give one to the city staff.
Okay.
Sure.
Hello, Mr. Vonk and council. My name is Lauren Bose, and I'm here on behalf of the Churchill Crime Prevention Club. And I'm also on many committees with the Churchill Association. And I'm here to bring to your attention that the police precinct number 1 has been under the new zoning ordinance, will be an MX3, the entire 3/4 of a city block at the entrance to Churchill North. And we're extremely concerned about this because historically that neighborhood has been discriminated against for 100+ years. And in all of the investigations that I've done to try to combat crime and bring safety to my neighborhood and all the failures of the city through generations, now we're being faced with the police leaving our neighborhood and a potentially 45-foot building being put where there used to be 7 single-family homes that reflect the entrance of Churchill North. We're very concerned because that corner of the city has an insane amount of crime, overdoses. All the corner stores in that side of town have been proven to have generational drug dealing that has gone on. And one of the number one things that we've identified as a club, there's 60 members active right now in my Churchill Crime Prevention Club, is that there are not enough private single-family home residences near 25th Street that can look out for each other because it is a dead man zone. There's nothing going on out there. And Churchill North doesn't even have a restaurant that you can has one, that you can sit down to have a free cup of water with your lunch. So all I ask is to reconsider some of the very aggressive commercial zoning on Q Street. The MX3 is just going to be absolutely devastating. I don't disagree with any, bigger buildings on North 25th Street. We need more density, obviously, to try to combat the craziness that's going on up there, but please reconsider putting the single family homes back on the 2500 block of Q, and also further down Q Street to put back in the single family residences that were lost through the erosion that was allowed by the city through generations in Churchill North. And also, I don't understand how we're going to have buildings with hundreds of residents in them if the infrastructure of the city is so dilapidated that we can't even sustain ourselves. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Copeland Casati and I'm on Grace Street. And today I want to talk to y'all about sustainability. Tall density is energy inefficient, anti-solar, and squelches sustainability and resiliency goals. Recently, sustainability staff enthused, tall density creates wind. Tall buildings intensify heat islands, trap pollution, and hurt community health while increasing utility costs. Wind tunnels create hazardous conditions, not beneficial. Tall buildings use 2.5 times more electricity than buildings with 6 stories or less, each height equally increasing its greenhouse gas emissions in residential structures. Concerned about impacts, I reached out to Kevin Vonk. Homeowners are investing in solar where zoning will now blanket and shade. He acknowledged, I agree that access to natural sunlight is an important consideration as we set the rules that shape our city. With that, it is not the only thing we need to consider. Taller buildings can help cast shade that mitigate impacts from urban heat islands. How are we going to be net zero if you shade neighbors? Isn't solar supposed to be for all? Tall towers block sunlight, threatening residents' ability to benefit from solar. I feel like I'm stating the obvious. Concrete pillars do not aid sustainability, energy efficiency, or health. You know what provides shade, cools heat islands, and supports sustainability goals? Residential yards. Yards provide more tree canopy than tree wells or parks, decreasing surface temperatures by as much as 41 degrees. Yards grow food, absorb runoff, and provide wildlife habitat. Concrete pillars and amenity space do none of that. Only 4.3 square miles of Richmond are parks. Our residential yards are the backbone of sustainability strategies, including cooling and air purification. Richmond must be true sustainability advocates and protect communities' solar access and soil-based yard percentages, which benefit us unlike concrete. But staff ties tall concrete to our transportation needs. GRTC does not release its neighborhood data. Why? But I don't see Scott's Edition riding. It is residents in existing affordable housing that ride the bus. Research shows luxury apartments don't bring bus ridership. They chase out residents who ride. That too is unsustainable. Richmond must protect our city's sustainability commitments. Concrete towers and amenity spaces are energy inefficient, anti-solar, squelch affordable housing, and our sustainability and resiliency goals. Thank you.
Anybody else in person? Sir?
Yeah.
Welcome.
My concern is more about
Sir, could you offer your name?
Jonathan. My name's Jonathan. My concern is more about public use and public bathrooms, and the growth for the next 50 years doesn't really look into the use of public space. As it happens, growing cities will also have a homeless growth as well, unfortunately. And these homelessness is not going to stop. And they will need, public bathrooms that aren't currently available in anywhere in the city. People have to try and use restaurants to try and use a public bathroom. It doesn't add to the comfort of the city as well. If you're a tourist and you go to a public park in the city, you're not gonna be able to find a bathroom that's in a set location that you know that's gonna be kept clean, secure, all of that. So I just think it's something that needs to be added for the next zoning as well.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
If anybody else in the audience before we move to the online comments? Okay, Mary Ann, could you unmute?
Holly.
Okay, Holly Chasen Young, you should be able to unmute and offer your comments. What's the trick, Mary Ann, for?
I believe it's space bar, that's all.
Okay, Holly, if you're having trouble unmuting, if you hit space bar and alt together, I believe, you should be able to offer your comments. Okay, Holly, we're gonna pause for a moment and unmute the next speaker and come back to you. So hang tight. Mary Ann, do you want to try another speaker?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Okay, this is Holly. Can I still speak?
Please.
Thank you, members of the advisory committee, for allowing me to speak. I am Holly Chasen Young, and I live in the 3rd District. I've lived here for the past 20 years. I support Richmond's need to expand housing and plan for growth, but I want to highlight why the zoning refresh as currently structured feels incomplete and how we can make it more human-centered. We cannot build more density on broken systems. This past winter, our water system failed twice. That wasn't just an inconvenience. It is proof that our infrastructure is already at its breaking point. If we add thousands of new housing units without parallel upgrades to water, sewer, stormwater, and energy systems, we're not building a stronger community. We're building fragility into our future. Infrastructure must come first. The refresh eliminates parking minimum citywide, or at least in this area. While the long-term vision of walkable, transit-oriented development is crucial, Richmond isn't there yet. Without realistic provisions for parking and loading, we'll see trucks blocking bike lanes, residents circling for curb space, and unsafe streets for pedestrians. Functionality is a human-centered value too. I also urge us to think beyond housing. As a strategy consultant, the kinds of businesses our zoning encourages matters. In my own neighborhood all around me, I see a boarded up bank, a Walmart that opened and closed within 5 years, an abandoned Walgreens, a cluster of pawn shops, vape shops, dollar stores, and massage parlors that are sketchy, sorry. Around them are unhoused neighbors, some living in tents, many clearly struggling with addiction, and trash that goes uncollected. This is the lived-in reality of corridors without thoughtful planning. But Richmond deserves corridors with a different story. Maybe gourmet markets, small-owned coffee shops, ice cream shops, other local businesses that bring people together to spark real momentum. Zoning should encourage that kind of mix. A neighborhood with retail, food, small businesses, and services that meet people's needs and foster dignity. Otherwise, we risk doubling down on the cycle of blight. So in closing, I urge this committee to ensure the zoning refresh ties density to increases directly to infrastructure upgrades, provides functional requirements for parking and loading, and plans with love and intentionality for business corridors that serve residents with vitality, not blight. A human-centered Richmond for all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jacob should be able to unmute.
Hey, Jacob, you can unmute.
Hi there, my name is Jacob Sherrod. I have the dubious credential of being the author of Richmond's series of, or excuse me, I should say Wikipedia series of articles in the Richmond water crisis and our broader water system. 25,000 words and counting, please go check it out. So one of the things that I wanna highlight is that, yes, our water plant failed in January. Yes, we've had continuing issues. We've had issues before then, right? But the bigger issue is the pipes. And the pipes in the city are a fixed cost. So to an extent, by driving investment, by increasing density and increasing the number of ratepayers that we have, that'll increase the number of people that you can use our existing infrastructure, and also thereby increasing the number of people who can support that infrastructure financially. And one of the things to remember is that our water plant, it did not fail because of capacity issues, right? The pipes are not failing necessarily always because of capacity issues. They're failing because they're old, right? And we don't have that much money as a city. So to increase the amount of money that we have, we can't annex, that's illegal under the General Assembly. To increase the amount of money we have, we do at some point have to say, how can we get more money into the city that we already have? And the way to do that is by increasing density. So again, I think the steps that we're taking in the code refresh are going way in the right direction. But I would call upon us to go a little bit more, to not be afraid of density, right? And thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you. Hall should be able to unmute. Okay, Brock Hall.
Hi, this is Brock. I live in Manchester. I want to talk about use restrictions. I think there's a sort of disconnect between what people think they do and what actually happens. I'm going to focus mostly on parking because that's what I'm most familiar with, but the same principles would still apply with other things like gyms, pools, nurseries, because I guess I don't understand that one, but because I guess plants are bad. I don't understand that. But these things all still happen. So you can still have parking spaces, you could still have plants growing, gyms, you can have backyard barbecue, whatever. But it does come with some significant problems. So in the case of parking specifically, by banning the use of structured parking or flat parking or however you want to define these things, really you're just making it so people can't use it as far as the effect of these policies. So for example, let's say I'm a business, I close at 6, so I have this empty parking lot. I can't let anyone else use it as a matter of policy because that's what the city says. I'm honestly not even sure if I could let people use it for free. I'm actually not sure on that, but I definitely couldn't use it. I couldn't put up meters and charge people. And so you just have this empty parking lot, right? This is artificial scarcity, which leads to a market failure. So normally what would happen is I would rent those spaces out, and since there are people who need parking, they would rent them and everyone's happy, right? People have a place to park. I don't have all this wasted land that's dedicated to parking. So so what happens, because the only way to have more parking is to bundle it with an alternative use for that on-premise use. So this directly raises the cost of tenancy. So if I'm renting an apartment and I have an on-premise space, I'm paying for that space, regardless of if I use it or not. And this is true of gyms, this is true of pools, this is true of many other things. And parking is just enormously expensive. A flat space is like $5,000 to $15,000, probably more now. Structured garage, we're talking $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 per space. And this directly increases cost of living for no clear benefit to me whatsoever, right? So you're just creating a lot of empty parking lots, which people don't like, and you're making it harder to park because from a driver's perspective, the supply of parking spaces is zero, right? If on-street parking is occupied. So this is how you end up with this seemingly contradictory situation of all these empty parking lots, and yet somehow it's very difficult to find a parking space. So in general, have a reason to not allow a use, but also like if you have a parking space, you should be able to rent or share a parking space. I really just I struggle to see any purpose to these sorts of use restrictions. So thank you.
Thank you.
Tyler should be able to unmute.
Hey, Tyler Kmisnik,
Yep. Are you all able to hear me?
you can, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Hey, everyone. My name's Tyler Misenchek. I'm 24 and I live in the 2nd District. And I wanted to speak today on how the recent property assessments impact people like me who live in the city but don't own their own home. Because again, this year's property assessment shows that home prices are drastically increasing across the city. And the average home in Richmond is now assessed more than 55% higher than what it was just 5 years ago. For first-time homebuyers, the sharp rise in housing costs creates a major barrier for entry. Many people who live in the city and wish to stay in the city are being priced out and cannot establish permanent roots in Richmond. Prices for existing homes are skyrocketing across the city, and it's not developers that are raising the cost for these homes, it's scarcity. First-time homebuyers can't compete in Richmond's housing market anymore. There aren't enough affordable entry-level homes. And it's turning many people who live in Richmond to the surrounding counties in search of more abundant and less expensive housing. And when this happens, we lose members of our communities, we lose families and supporters of local businesses. All that to be said, Richmond needs more housing, especially for people who don't already own their own home. I support the direction the code refresh is heading in and the option it provides for entry-level housing. And I would even support more housing options that create more residences like triplexes in attached neighborhoods, because these opportunities expand options for first-time homebuyers and people who want to establish roots in Richmond. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Marianne, did we have others? Okay, Evan.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Ken, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Hello, everybody. My name is Kevin Cianfarini. I'm a resident of the Fulton neighborhood, and I just want to express that I think the zoning draft is headed in the right direction. However, I would like to see more housing density offered in the 1st and 4th city council districts. So as it stands right now, allowing those portions of the city to remain largely sparse and exclusive areas further fuels housing demand in lower income areas of the city, like where I am in Fulton. These areas are also already the places shouldering most of the density increases that we're seeing in the draft map as proposed. The net result, if we don't craft this right, is displacement. So I want to balance what I'm saying by saying that no neighborhood should be exempt from growth. We need to be fair while we're rewriting the zoning code, and right now I'm worried that we're not being fair. We're hearing a lot of anti-density comments in the wealthier areas of those cities, and those voices seem to be inherently louder because they have the financial wherewithal to attend public meetings in the middle of the workday. Most people in my neighborhood do not. The solution to this isn't to delay or downzone areas of the city. The solution is to expose the wealthiest and most exclusive areas of the city to the same demand for growth that the rest of the city has been feeling for years. I want to implore the Zoning Advisory Council to be more courageous in upzoning the 1st and 4th city council districts. It will help alleviate displacement elsewhere, particularly in areas that are already experiencing it today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. So I know that Mr. Sherrod offered his comments. Maybe his hand just hasn't come down, or is there anyone else that hasn't commented, Marianne?
Rachel.
Okay, Rachel, you're unmuted. Okay, Rachel, you're able to unmute. Sorry, thank you, Brett.
Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm in the 4th district, and I would just want to know how the
Ma'am, could you offer your name for the record, please?
Rachel?
Okay, Rachel, thank you.
Hi, yes, no problem. I'm getting some feedback. Are you getting feedback from my microphone?
Yes, we can hear that. Yes.
Ah.
Okay, you want to try? Can you try again?
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you for hosting an opportunity for citizens to express our concerns. I guess my concern, I do have a concern with this code refresh as I'm exploring it, most specifically because we have invited data centers into the city of Richmond recently, and I believe we'll be getting more, as well as some of the counties. And it's been made aware to me the excess use of water of these data centers and electricity. As someone who lives in a home, I've already been notified that our water bills will be going up next year, as well as our power bills. And I just, as far as concern about the infrastructure, as someone else had mentioned, I don't feel like we have the infrastructure ready to be inviting high density into the city at this time, especially since we have recently invited the data centers in. And I encourage you all to look at the very high use of energy and water that the data centers will be creating first.
Okay, thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Marianne, if there are no others online. Okay. With nobody else online, we're going to go ahead and close the public comment period. And we'll turn it over to Marianne Pitts to provide a council recap and meeting introduction for today.
Good afternoon, Marianne Pitts with the Planning Department. At the last meeting, the consultant team brought some ideas, some initial proposals for modifications to the Module 1 material based on comments we received, and the council discussed that. Building coverage, development along corridors, and setbacks were some of the items that were raised during that last meeting, and introduced the body to the development standards. At this meeting, you've received a set of questions that are going to be utilized in reviewing those development standards with you all. They're also going to be introducing the administrative provisions and discussing the goals today with you for that section of the document. So that Module 3 information. Again, the comment period has been extended to the 28th for online engagement. Staff has been going to a lot of community meetings to get it out in the community, get people understanding what the material it is, so people have the opportunity to comment as well. Today, the consultant team is going to share some information about initial what's coming in through the online portal. I have emails for you all. I just have to redact some information, and I'll get those to you probably tomorrow that we've been receiving as well. They fill in some of the gaps. We've been getting a lot. Oh, I'm timing myself. Okay, lots of comments in the 4th district that you might not be seeing on the map are coming in via email, some in on 25th and Jefferson, a cluster, but we've received several emails, and I'll be getting that together as a packet email to you.
Does anyone have any council members have questions for Marianne? I'm sorry, go ahead, Lisa.
Just thank you to the staff who've been spending a lot of evenings making sure that it knows about this important project.
Thank you. And I failed to mention at the start of the meeting that after our August discussion, where we had a number of comments around the proposed BRT route and the city's role in addressing housing affordability and displacement, staff has extended an invitation to the city's housing director to address the group, and we're reaching out to GRTC so we can bring you some additional information. And I apologize if they weren't here today, but we are working on getting them scheduled so that we can get some more information and continue some of the consultants' discussions along the Chamberlain, consultants' questions along the Chamberlain corridor from our August meeting.
The housing director will definitely be here at the October meeting. Great. GRTC has stated that they're willing to attend a meeting, so.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other questions? Great. I think at this point, we'll turn it over to Renee Fieberstein to start the draft development standards discussion. And just remember for the council, if you have questions, please state your name and speak loudly for the benefit of those in the audience and online. So welcome, Renee.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth and Marianne. I'm actually, if you don't mind, I'm just going to give you a quick update on the comments on the website first, and then we'll continue with the development standards. Let me share my screen. All right, can you guys see my screen right now?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so you should be seeing the slides change. So just a quick update on the interactive map comments. And before we get to that, a reminder for everybody who's in the room that there's a whole series of new engagement sessions that are coming up over the next little while. So a general session to call into, a bilingual Spanish. These are all office hours, so these are opportunities for members of the public to call in and ask us questions about the zoning code update and give comments. So a general session, a bilingual Spanish and English session, one specific to the 6th and 9th districts, and then a renter session. So all this information should be out there, but these are links to join these sessions when they come up. Updating on the map comments here. So just a quick update here. As was stated, the map comments are still open until September 28th at midnight. So there's still some more time to comment. We've gotten lots of comments so far. 1,084 comments and 943 replies. So lots and lots of comments. That includes comments that are uploaded from open house post-its that were made in person. 306 unique commenters. So that means that most people are leaving multiple comments, but there's still a fair number of commenters. That doesn't capture all the individuals, of course, who left anonymous comments at the public open house. The five top neighborhoods we're getting comments from: the Fan, Shockoe Bottom, Bellevue, the Museum District, and Ginter Park. And you can see on the map here, there's a concentration of comments in the west end and the north, and some of the kind of near south area. There's 36 other neighborhoods in the city that we've received no comments for, predominantly down in the Broad Rock and Midlothian areas in the south. So we'd love to see more comments, particularly from those areas over the next little while, just to get more representative feedback from across the city. Top 5 comments, themes of the comments so far, and obviously some of these are overlapping, but just to give you a flavor of the direction so far. Top comment is specific comments on sites, asking either for increases or decreases in intensity in specific areas based on neighborhood context. So looking for less height or more height permissions, or less or more numbers of units. So lots and lots of specifics that we've got to work through around specific blocks or areas. General comment about promoting walkability along nodes and corridors with mixed-use development. We've heard a lot along those lines. Strengthening transit corridors, both existing and planned, by coordinating with new zoning. Expanding and protecting the tree canopy through preservation and planting, adding standards for that. Ensuring building height transitions fit adjacent neighborhood characteristics and or maintain sunlight into those neighborhoods. So those are sort of the top themes. And as I said, we've got a few more weeks to comment. I would invite anybody in the room who hasn't commented yet and who has comments to go there and leave your thoughts. Or feel free to reach out to others who you know who might be interested. We particularly like to hear from more people in the less represented southern parts of the city, if possible. So that's just a quick update on the mapping. And I'm now going to turn it over to Colin to talk about the development standards and to lead discussion on that draft that was shared with you last time. And Colin, not sure if you want me to continue sharing my screen or if you'd like to share.
Yeah, please share.
Okay.
Renee, Colin, take a pause for just a second. This is Elizabeth. Do any council members have a question for Renee about the mapping comments or? Thanks. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Renee. Excuse me. So I guess this is our opportunity to discuss the development standards that we provided with you at the last meeting. Sorry, this is Colin Scarf from Code Studio. So last time we shared with you the pedestrian access requirements, bicycle parking proposed requirements, vehicle access, some of the parking lot landscaping requirements, and miscellaneous vehicle use area requirements, and then the transition and screening. We're still working on the second piece of development standards. So fences and walls, general kind of planting and landscaping requirements, signs and trees, and then the affordability piece. We're still working on that stuff. We didn't quite have time to have that ready for this meeting, so I apologize for that. I think we didn't have enough time to work through the issues with staff and get them comfortable with the material before we presented it to you guys. So we'll have that ready for your next meeting as we work through that material with staff and get it ready for you guys. So next slide, please, Renee. So I was just hoping to walk through the different pieces that we provided with you at the last meeting. So we've kind of got some questions here. So if you guys just want to jump in, I think generally, do you guys have any kind of general comments or questions about the draft development standards in general that you wanted to share, or if you have any general questions that you wanted to ask, now would be a good time.
Yeah, Philip Hart. Can you give us a quick definition of site modification? And then sort of a second, this is not general, specific. I just wondered why site modifications don't require the bicycle parking and transit access.
What I'm not exactly sure how it's defined, but it's something along the lines of if you modify more than, let's say, 15,000 square feet of site area, if you stay with under that number, it would be considered a site modification. Anything more than that, and it would be considered kind of new construction. And so it's just kind of a threshold, and we can play around with and modify that threshold to some number that makes sense for everybody. And really, we can turn things on and off as we need to, but from a bicycle parking perspective, it's really more of a use-based requirement, which is more associated with the building itself. So just making modifications to your parking lot, for example, we've kind of suggested that you shouldn't have to provide bike parking. But if you're, changing a use from one use to another, or you're renovating a building significantly and adding a different use, then you should meet the bike parking requirement. And we've kind of taken a light touch on the transit access requirement in general. We kind of need to work through that a little bit more, I think. Exactly what that means, but I think the standards are fairly general in themselves, and that you have to provide a space for a bus stop on the edge of your site, I believe. So right now, the only thing that would trigger that is new construction.
Thank you.
We'll get to that later.
This is Brian White. I'm sorry if I'm being ignorant here, but if these are not necessarily, these don't apply to single family properties, correct? They're just larger properties.
Yes.
Some of them, you have to go to the.
But for the most part, site development standards don't apply to single family. There are some pieces that apply to single family, like driveway widths and things like that. Right. And if you're doing a large enough single family townhouse project, things like bicycle parking would be required, but you're not going to have to landscape your parking lot or your driveway in a single family house.
We had a question from Maritza and Damian and Preston.
On this one, really just few questions, and it's on that page. It says standards may apply when it's a blue circle, but then on letter D below, it says that they must be met. So I just may or must. And then second, on that same D, the applicable standards may be further modified by the applicability provisions for each, and I'm like, by whom? Who's the actor? And then the third, you don't have to answer all this now, these are just comments, and I can scan my comments as well. On change of use, on the transition screens, frontage screen, and site elements. I think some of that might not be like physically possible if a building like already exists and it's moving from one use to another. Like what qualifies a change of use, if it's still within like commercial, or is it like from one commercial type to another? Because then you could think of like a hair salon becoming a restaurant, and now they have to do screening that they have no room for on their site. Those are my three comments: may or must, who may further modify, and then these change of use provisions.
Yeah, there's a lot embedded in there. Did you suggest that you could scan them and provide them to us so that we can work through those?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Damian Pitts. I have kind of a question and then some observations about the required bicycle parking standards. First, the question is, where are they coming from? Were they informed by, or are they consistent with any applicable best practices from the League of American Bicyclists or any organization like that?
We're going to talk about each one of those on a different slide.
Okay. It's all right.
Like each word inside of each one.
Okay. I will wait until Maritza tells me.
No. Slide about bike parking.
Okay, sure. Let's wait. Thank you. Sure. Yeah.
I would have done the exact same thing, so I'm glad Damian went first. I'll try to make an overarching comment, which is, and perhaps this has already been done, and please jump in if that's the case, but I do know that the Department of Planning and Development review recently put in a lot of time in refining was previously the plan of development process to be a more straightforward site plan process that only applies in a very specific delineated list of circumstances. And so I would want to make sure that as we review the applicability of these additional standards, that it doesn't inadvertently draw out the scope of what now must go through a site plan process in order to ensure conformance with each of these development standards that are imposed by the code. So again, it's just sort of a consistency comment, and don't expect a reply today other than just to flag that and say, as you review these and go through that, perhaps apply that lens and figure out whether any of these will have an unexpected impact on the current standards that are applied for how a site plan review would be conducted.
Okay.
This is Elizabeth Greenfield. I suggest, to following up on Preston's point, taking a look at the site plan checklist. The ordinance is great, but the checklist is probably really where the meat of what Preston's getting at is.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions at this point? Okay.
So this was the pedestrian access provisions that we proposed. I guess in general, do they make sense? Is this something we want to regulate? Do we have the correct access types attributed to the right districts? The district standards require street-facing entrances in certain instances. And so this is a requirement to help ensure that street-facing entrances connect to kind of the public realm. And they come in different types, kind of type 1 being like the most intensive from a kind of a pedestrian perspective, type 2 being kind of in the middle, and then type 3 being the least pedestrian friendly, but still requiring a kind of a connection from buildings across parking lots to the kind of public sidewalk system. So we've got type 1, 2, and 3. And then the idea is these types would apply in certain districts where we were trying to get certain levels of pedestrian connections to the public sidewalk system.
Thank you, Preston Lloyd. Two comments for food for thought. The first is that I haven't seen a waiver process that would be identified here. I recently worked on a special use permit project for a multifamily project that was on a well-defined public street, but it was located substantially below grade, in which case there was no ability to create pedestrian connections because of the third dimension. If it were two dimensions, you would say, yes, they're right next to a public street. You should have a entrance that then faces that public street. But of course, the topography was an unusual condition that justified a different design, and the reviewers from PBR had no issue with that. As long as there was ultimately a pedestrian connection, which was made at the request of the council. So long story short, I think there does need to be some sort of relief valve, if you will, a waiver process that would allow for unique conditions to be reviewed and approved by the director. So that's comment number one. Comment number two is that there are certain portions of the city, many of which were annexed from Chesterfield County at varying parts in our periods in our history where there is no public sidewalk along public rights of way.
Yeah.
And so we wouldn't want to require residential developers to build a sidewalk to nowhere if no current public infrastructure exists for them to connect to. So just another condition that would justify a different approach.
These are great points. Thank you. Do you think in certain instances the variance process would work? Or
No, I don't think so, because in Virginia, you have to prove a hardship by a showing that is a heightened level of standard, that effectively you cannot develop the property for any reason. And so we wouldn't be eligible to go to the BZA and plead our case for a variance, given the applicable standard of review. Instead, I think there just needs to be a more simple process where the director can weigh the evidence that's provided as submitted as part of the PA or the site plan review process and make a call that the circumstances justify a deviation. We wouldn't want to call it a variance because in Virginia that has very specific connotation.
Okay.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Charlie.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to the extent, and this is one of those intent, good implementation, would take some, to Preston's point, would take some finesse. I do wonder, particularly at the single family infill and 2-family infill level, 6 feet wide sidewalks. I mean, not to get too picky, but 6 feet seems extremely generous. If that might, to the extent this does get on the books, if that number were 3 feet, that might be a little. People might do more. They could do more, but I don't want to suggest 6 feet is like the bare minimum. If, for instance, a lot of our city sidewalks are 3 feet, 4 feet in some of our older neighborhoods. So, kind of nitpicking a little bit, but just wanted to open that number out for discussion.
4 feet, better than 3 feet.
6 feet just seems like a lot. I don't know, and maybe some houses would benefit from that, but maybe you've got a specific situation where your house fronts onto, this is all anecdotal, right? But maybe the street that your house actually fronts onto is 60, 70, 80 feet away, maybe, right? Having like a 6 foot wide avenue all the way to that point, if it is required, for the lowest hanging fruit of what we're doing, single family infill, I just thought it was worth discussing. I could frankly see it being appropriate for larger developments, and no personal issue there, but implementation's key.
To that same end, Charlie, this is Maritza. I didn't quite understand external connectivity versus internal connectivity. What do you mean by those two different areas? And then I'll ask part of my next question is related to an answer to that.
Well, the external connectivity is just making sure you connect to pedestrian connections that exist or proposed as part of your development generally. That makes sense.
So that would be like there's a sidewalk on your property, or not on your property, in the right of way in front of your property. If you abut to a public sidewalk, and the external connectivity means that you are providing a pedestrian walkway from your building to that sidewalk.
Yeah, and we probably need to like finesse this a little bit, but like, yeah, if there's an existing trail on the back edge of your property, you should try to connect to it. You should connect to it, ideally.
Okay, and, okay, so it's not like a sidewalk, not a public sidewalk, so you're talking about, okay.
No.
So then I would say that I don't know if we should regulate the minimum width of the pedestrian walkway, maybe leave it to what's happening on that, in that area, because it may make sense that it should be 3 feet or something. And, or there might be like, yeah, you want to connect, but there's just not a lot of room due to some other condition. And so I don't want to have someone have to go through like some sort of special use permit or something just for because they can only do 2 feet. Similarly, like the walkways and just like the ADA compliance and having it be accessible, like that's going to be covered through your building code, I believe. So like, I don't know if we should like add that here as well. Like what if you are connecting to a trail and it's like stepping down, or like there's steps, or there's like, you want to have like slate pieces because that's like your garden style or something. Like, I don't know if we want to regulate exact materials there. And then on the internal connectivity, is that like, let's say you're building you're building a building that has like an internal courtyard to it that has walkways in it that's like exposed to the air. Are you talking about, are those walkways?
Good question.
Okay. Well, if so, I don't think we should have a minimum width or like the materials specified.
Yeah. I don't know what the minimum is for ADA, but I think, is it 3.5 feet? Charlie might know.
I've seen I've seen 5 feet come up most frequently. But it depends on the existing conditions and stuff. So
I mean, I think it depends on the building. It's sort of like those things are changing too. So I almost feel like I'd rather just have architects and civil engineers help determine that according to the code.
Yeah, I guess we're just hoping the sidewalk is wide enough that 2 people can walk by heading in different directions without smacking into each other.
I think that makes a lot of sense on like a regular sidewalk or like a bigger entrance to a building. But if you're thinking that this is going to apply to like the interior courtyard of a building, which is still outside, but could be considered an internal walkway, maybe the landscape architecture doesn't make sense to have that level of dictation from the zoning ordinance.
Okay.
This is Jennifer Mullen, just to piggyback off of what everybody else has said, and this might fall in Preston's category of having some waivers available, but the pedestrian walkway must be placed on both sides of the driveway, particularly as you're thinking about infill development on tracts of land that are not on roads that have sidewalks fronting them. Most likely you're only going to have sidewalks on one side of your internal drive. So I think just thinking about those types of developments as well, as opposed to just adding cost to have it on both sides of the road.
So you're just suggesting on one side of the driveway?
Yes.
Okay.
This is Charlie. I mean, did I understand earlier, I think it was in response to Philip's question, that in single-family residential neighborhoods, these standards do not apply?
They do apply.
They do apply.
For new construction.
So that would be more of a subdivision requirement in a new subdivision, single-family neighborhood, if that's what you're talking about, or you're talking about like just an infill law?
Infill lot.
Yeah. So for an infill lot, an existing residential,
You would have to provide a connection from your street-facing entrance to the public sidewalk system for a single-family house.
right?
And then create the public sidewalks with it.
Well, yeah, but what if there is no sidewalk?
Yeah,
Okay.
well,
My entire neighborhood in Glen Burnie doesn't have sidewalks.
Yeah.
And someone was doing an infill project I doubt they're gonna want to extend sidewalks to the entire neighborhood or the entire street for that matter.
Yeah.
I mean, because then you get into like stormwater management stuff too, so it's not just like, oh, you just put in a sidewalk. Sometimes that right of way stuff, so.
I mean, I think one of the things we could do is look at, some kind of exemption for single family structures or duplexes. If you think that makes sense, if there's no sidewalks, I guess, should there be a full surface weather connection from a required street facing entrance to the street in a single family setting, even if there's not a sidewalk? I don't know. I mean, there might be a sidewalk there one day
On the development.
and they'd be ready to go.
This is Jennifer Mullen again. I think it depends on the development and the structure of how the internal road is coming in. And so if you have just one versus 15, that obviously changes the dynamic of it.
I mean, what most people would do in a single family setting is that, they would have a driveway that they would basically use as a pedestrian connection. And, they might have a sidewalk coming off of that driveway to the front door of the house, for example, if the driveway's on the side. I don't think it's something very difficult to meet.
But this is Elizabeth Greenfield. Not every neighborhood has a driveway, nor are they
Yeah.
allowed to have driveways.
Yeah.
They have alley access, so
Yeah. So then they should definitely have a sidewalk that connects, a pedestrian walkway that connects to the sidewalk, shouldn't they? Or the street.
it's Elizabeth again. I would love if every neighborhood had a driveway and a sidewalk, not a driveway. But we're talking about old established neighborhoods where particularly single family where someone could be doing an infill project that's one lot or two, and the expectation of extending sidewalk for.
I think he's saying extending the walkway, like having
Yeah.
a path.
Not the sidewalk, just the pedestrian walkway on your site.
Understood.
But it's still supposed to be 6 feet.
But it's still supposed to be 6 feet, and if you wanted to like do
Yeah.
a slate path or something where you don't
Yeah.
have to have ADA access to your single family home, you'd have to have it be like a
Really wide.
concrete. So
Yeah.
I think that,
Yeah, I think it should be case by.
We'll look at reducing that number.
Yeah.
Or not even specifying a number, I guess, and letting other folks figure that out. What's the appropriate width?
I will say, chiming in really quick, even at the single family and two family level, for a lot of building permits that we've applied for with Public Works, Public Works reviews your building permit, right? Even just for a single family house or even just for an addition, or they review it. I'm wondering if this might be something that they can look at as an extension of their review. Their review is a little more subjective than the zoning level review tends to be, in my experience, for better or worse. They, will apply for a single family building permit on a house that doesn't have sidewalk, and if the request is reasonable, they will ask you to put sidewalk on that frontage. Like we've
Mhm.
seen it for a lot of our requests just for single family building permits. So it does come up. I'm wondering if this is something that can be folded into their purview, perhaps, maybe not even through the site plan, because that's 3 dwelling units or more that triggers that right now.
Mhm.
Instead, just DPW reviewers might have something to say here, and might be looser and more ambidextrous that way than a kind of rigid zoning requirement. Thinking out loud, I don't know what the answer is, but just wanted to throw that out there.
Charlie, this is Preston. I'm going to chime in on what you just commented and make the observation that I think part of the reluctance that I have with the rigidity of what we have here, even though it's very well intentioned, and I understand trying to promote pedestrian connectivity, which is laudable, that to get relief from that, your only option is to either get a zoning text amendment, which requires a council process, or get a special use permit, which requires going through a council process. And if we're trying to increase the supply of housing that we're trying to deliver in the city, then that level of administrative burden, I think, is going to work against that objective. So the solution I would offer is one of two: either you provide a very low impact administrative waiver process that can be freely granted if the circumstances allow it. Or you take it out of the code entirely. You say that pedestrian connectivity shall be promoted according to policies and procedures developed by the Department of Planning and Development Review, and you let it happen as part of your site plan review process or whatever the building permit process would be that applies to the property. So I don't necessarily know that it has to be in the code, because as soon as you put it in the code, it again has those administrative burdens that are going to be imposed if there may be very justifiable reasons to have a different outcome.
Elizabeth Greenfield again, and to follow up on Preston about requiring an SUP. A lot of this is going to be talking about single family, again, infill. That's a lot of cost and time to put on, one single family home potentially. I think we need to make this a little easier and less time consuming and costly for the potential applicant owner down the road.
And this is Jennifer Mellon. Just one follow-up question on the connectivity, again, back to the greenways and trails and bicycle lanes. I would just want to make sure that ties into the overall greenways plans and bicycle plans, because I don't think that they want connections at every single property. That, I'm not a great bike rider, but I think that would be disruptive if you were riding fast going down those greenways. So I think just making sure that it's all coordinated, that it is, you have a connection that you can get to it is encouraged, but that it ties into where they want those actual physical connections.
This is Charlie Means. I want to make sure I understand the public policy reason for this connectivity, going back to talking about individual infill developments in residential neighborhoods. If somebody is building a house on a lot and they don't care about having a sidewalk that goes to the street or that goes to their driveway, are we trying to tell them, well, you got to have it anyway?
Yes.
Yeah, that makes no sense to me whatsoever. I mean, if somebody doesn't feel like they need it, that's fine. If we're talking about an area where there is already a sidewalk or whatever, where there's bicycle traffic and so forth, maybe that's a different matter, but doesn't the property owner get to determine what he's going to build on his lot or not under these circumstances? It just doesn't seem to make sense to me.
A lot of this kind of does happen anyway. A lot of the single family houses I've dealt with and helped construct, you're going to have post deliveries, you're going to have people coming to your front door. It's pretty common that, anyone building a product that they're trying to sell, they're going to have some semblance of a front door, reasonable way to get there. And it can be site specific. It can be preferred one way or the other, but I don't know. I can kind of see it both ways here.
Well, I guess the thing is that you might be thinking about certain conditions in certain neighborhoods that are very dense and have big like sidewalk connectivity, but other places where let's say there's an empty parcel, like somewhere in the south side where it's like a very large one, or north side even, there's like lots of big parcels where someone might build their house like somewhere on this like 2-acre parcel, and they don't want a sidewalk all the way from their front door to they'll use their driveway, I guess is how you would respond. So as long as there's a way that in some conditions people can use driveways, we obviously want people to have, in the dense urban conditions, we obviously would want someone to have they themselves would probably want a sidewalk a walkway up to their front door. It's just that we need to figure out a way to have it allow for the variability of our city.
Elizabeth Greenfield here, and I'll get to Jamie. I think what I'm hearing is that we don't want to mandate a specific width. We need to stay away from materials. That should be more of a consumer choice and more flexibility from, if we want a walkway, don't have a driveway, sidewalks are already there. I think that's what I'm taking away from this conversation and sending you guys back to work on. But Damien, you got a comment?
Yeah, I'm generally agree with the general sentiment that I think I'm hearing, that, we don't understand why we need to mandate that a single family home have pedestrian connectivity from the street or the sidewalk to the home itself. But I guess I will ask if, is the motivation for thinking of mandating something like that, the idea that we want to protect neighbors, is the kind of underlying thinking from the part of the consultants or from whatever certain norms led to this recommendation that if a homeowner doesn't provide that walkway access from, through their property from the street to their front door, that the postman, the delivery person, whoever else is showing up is going to use the neighbor's property, walk on their walkway and then cut over? Is that why we're talking about
No.
this?
No. And
No?
maybe this doesn't apply in RD, for example, but it really is intended to get at more higher intensity areas where you have buildings pulled up to the street with entrances and
Sure.
just making sure that pedestrians can get from the public sidewalk system to those building entrances conveniently and quickly, efficiently.
Yeah, for any type of commercial building, I think obviously that should be required, but I agree with what a lot of people are saying in the single family home context. If for some reason somebody wants to like walk through the mud to get to their house every day, then let them.
Yeah.
It's Elizabeth here. Folks, we have a number of development standards to get through,
Yeah.
and we have 40 minutes before we
All
get
right.
to our next agenda item. So I think it's safe to say that if we don't get all of our comments today, we can get them to the consultants and Mary Ann, but let's try to keep this moving because we just beat up sidewalks for a good 15, 20 minutes. Where to go?
Well, we've expanded the bike parking requirements so they apply more than just residential. So we're trying to have bike parking requirements for a variety of uses. Are they based on best practices from an established entity? It's a really good question. Again, as with car parking ratios, they're not an exact science, right? So I would suggest for the most part, these are not difficult to meet. One thing I would be concerned about though, and is making sure that we're not requiring too much from any one use. So we may need to add a cap so that a large hotel, for example, doesn't have to provide, 200 bike parking spaces or something, which isn't ever going to get used potentially. But yeah, any thoughts on the idea of expanding bike parking? We have this idea of short term and long term. So short term would be for employees or no, not employees, for people visiting a store or a restaurant. They would have a short term space to leave their bike, and then long term would be for employees or people working at the restaurant for longer periods of time, that they had a safer space to leave their bike.
So what is this is Brian White. What is the residential short-term? How does that work? If it is for somebody just coming to visit, are you saying that for visitors and for residents, you have to have?
Yeah,
So
you'd have a bike rack somewhere.
you gotta do
bike
one per
racks.
4 plus 1 per 20, so it's really more like. So it's more than 1 per 4, then if you've got a larger property.
Yeah. And, that would be like a bike room or a bike cage or something. Where
I
bikes
think,
would
yeah,
be
let me,
stored.
this is Damien. I'm gonna jump in to the points I was about to make earlier. Thank you for answering my question about, whether this is pegged to some sort of standards. Yeah, I mean, I think there's no way of doing this that's gonna like entirely make sense, I don't think, but and a lot of it's contextual, so there are parts of the city that are dense and are bikeable and where we should be, and where there's like a bike culture, I guess, for lack of a better word, where we should be having more bike parking. But there's the same type of land use in another part of the city that's far more car oriented. Applying those same level of bike requirements wouldn't make any sense. So I think the first thing is we got to figure out how to delineate that in some fashion. But for those places that are bikeable, some of these uses, I think the required numbers are quite low. Daycares, if you're talking about, if a new daycare was built in my neighborhood, every single person who went there would be on their bike, nearly, 75% of the people would be going on their bike. That's what I see at the elementary school that we go to. So 1 per 5,000 square foot seems like not nearly enough. For entertainment, office, retail, and particularly food and beverage, again, in the denser, more bikeable parts of the city, if somebody builds a brewery in a bikeable part of the city, I would hope that they're building way more than one, if 4 bike parking spots at a 10,000 square foot facility, on the long term, I largely don't really see the need for any of that other than for these large apartment complexes that we're talking about. Again, if we're talking about large parking complexes out on Midlothian Turnpike, hopefully that area becomes bikeable at some point. But currently it's not, right? But the types of infill developments that we're encouraging in parts of the city via this zoning, permanent long-term, protected long-term biking is a very important thing. There's this development called the Trolley Barn, something or other, that was built in the, I guess, 5th district 8 years ago, that has massive glass enclosed long-term bike, units, I guess, spots that are always full. And in a place like that, I suspect it's like a 1-to-1 ratio of people to bikes living in that type of, dense urban area, young professional oriented, multifamily housing complex, right? So I would certainly hope that future developments that meet that description I just had are required to put in long-term bike parking like what we see at the trolley barns. So I just think that it needs to be kind of refined and narrowed in scope, refined and kind of delineated between bikeable areas and not somehow.
Okay. I think Wayne has a question online.
Yes. I absolutely agree with Damien. I'm looking at all of the spaces on the right side, and each of them, again, they say 1 per whatever square feet of area. So that is a concern. Definitely for the medical, I think that should be increased. Also, when it comes to medical, I'm curious as to, is that a dentist office? Is that a hospital? I think that maybe clarifying that category may be a good idea. But yeah, those were my thoughts. And then also looking at the right side, each of them say 1 per the area. And so I'm curious, is there a particular rule of thumb or a figure that you all are using to calculate those by chance? I'm just curious.
So it's 1 space, 1 bicycle space per 5,000 square feet of floor area is what that is suggesting.
Mm-hmm.
Why 5,000 or why 10,000? Like, what's the? Yeah, I think that's what Wayne was asking.
Absolutely.
Borrowed from another place. Honestly, it's not based on like, and it is, I would suggest, on the lower end of things. So it's a conservative approach in the scheme of things. I would suggest other communities have stronger bike parking requirements, but this is a little bit of a baby step in that direction. And maybe long term doesn't make sense. Maybe that's something we don't need. But I do feel that like people that are using a bike to get to work and back, depending on the weather conditions, might need a safe, dry place to store their bike during the day.
Gotcha. Well, I definitely agree with the influx of our biking population here in Richmond. I think that should definitely be looked at, and looking at each of those categories separately. I know that we borrowed from a different place, but definitely tailoring that to Richmond would be important. And then my other question is, when it says short-term and long-term, do we have clear definitions of what those mean? Is that short-term like 3 to 6 months, a year? What does that mean by chance?
It's just a type of parking that you have to provide. So
Okay.
to meet your short-term requirement, it could be like just a bicycle rack, right? With specific dimensions that you have to meet for that bicycle rack. But it's just that bicycle rack that you see, you know, in front of buildings in the sidewalk. And then long-term just means you have to like put it in a bicycle room or a locked cage or facility or something that's covered and protected by the weather. So you would have to have space allocated for that number of bikes on your site to meet those two requirements.
Okay. So are you saying that long term is when is when those bikes are housed for a number of days?
Or yeah, or the entire day or overnight versus like I'm just gonna pop in and have dinner or something and leave my bike.
Okay, understand. Thank you so much.
I think there's a lot of folks that have questions, so bear with me for just a second. Councilwoman Robertson asked to
Sorry.
follow up to Dr. Creedle's comment, if we're talking single family residences. After that, we're gonna get Charlie, then Preston, then Maritza, then Charles. And then Phil. Did you hear the question, Colin, about?
No.
Councilwoman Robertson. Councilwoman Robertson was asking as a follow-up to Dr. Creedle's question, if for the bike racks, if we're referring to single family. Anywhere.
Yeah. Single family not required.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, so I commute to work by bike like 3 times, 4 times a week, give or take. It's my preferred method of getting around the city. And yeah, so this approach is similar in a lot of ways to how we currently approach bike parking. Some of the numbers are a little more than what we do as it stands, shooting from the hip there. One thing that I've observed, both as a user and in representing the development community, is that the long-term allotment of bike parking spaces needed, being able to actually provide bike parking to that definition tends to produce these like kind of weird rooms and apartment buildings that are well intentioned, of course they are, but they turn into like these graveyards of bikes. And I know that's not zoning's fault that people behave that way, but I do wonder if there's like a softer approach to long term. The key word that we currently use and is in this draft is weatherproof or weather resistant to weather. I'm wondering if really if I'm biking around, if I can just see a covered bike station, like I'm happy, and I would leave my bike there more confidently anyway than just the short term outside of the restaurant. Let me just find the bike key and lock it up there. I wonder if we can look at maybe a more favorable longer term level of bike infrastructure than assuming that people will, like to Dr. Pitt's point, that Cary Street Station or whatever it's called, the former GRTC apartment complex. They've got these like glass cubes that are like chock full of bikes, and I'm not sure I would ever want to put my bike in there because it's just like too unwieldy and difficult. But if it were instead something easier to construct that is just as good, lighter, cheaper, faster, etc. My thoughts there. So.
Thank you. So my comment relates to the approach taken here, which is, understandably a one-size-fits-all approach. And as has been shared, I think given the dispersion of bicycle utilization throughout different areas of the city, the availability of safe bicycle pathways and infrastructure, I have concerns about that one-size-fits-all approach being realistic. And so I wonder, as two potential alternatives, do you tie the more aggressive requirements to areas that are within a certain distance of protected bike lane or something like that, or you create some sort of overlay, again, to try to get away from that one-size-fits-all approach and really recognize these are the areas that are best suited for bicycle utilization due to existing infrastructure. That's thought one. Thought two would be, do you instead let the market attempt to dictate some of that by providing incentives if you provide sufficient long-term bicycle infrastructure at the ratio that we think is a best practice, then you get something else. We don't have any parking restrictions, so we can't reduce your parking count. That would sort of be a natural alternative. But is there some, if you're in the multifamily context, you get some benefit that's going to make it worth the while. Because ultimately, a multifamily developer is putting bicycles in space that they're going to have to bear the cost to build rather than humans. And so we have to sort of acknowledge that we're putting that burden and that cost, we're making a policy choice for the developer and saying you must construct sufficient room within your project to house all these bicycles because we think that's important and we think it's going to benefit multimodal accessibility within certain areas of the city. And so again, you know, how do you, again, allow the market to help respond given using a carrot approach rather than a stick approach?
Understood.
So, this is Maritza Peachin, 2 comments. It says, regardless of size, you have to have a minimum of 2 short-term and minimum long-term spaces. I think that might be a little onerous for, especially for like commercial uses under 2,500 square feet.
Yeah.
So I think I suggest striking that minimum. And I think the second comment is on the description of the bicycle facilities. It's probably like 5 times longer than what's in our current zoning ordinance, and there's a lot of musts in there. And I know that these technologies evolve and like how we do bike parking will probably change over time, and I'm worried about having too much like dictated by the zoning ordinance related to the dimensions of things. And so those are the 2, and then I actually did have a third. Do you want to comment on, do you have anything on that, Colin? Okay.
No, I agree.
And then on the third is like kind of going to the number of spaces. It is a lot more than, it's a little bit more than what is in the current zoning ordinance. I think it would be a good idea to have a cap, as you suggested. And maybe the hotel number is too high right now, but I think there should be a cap probably for some of these uses like multifamily. And totally agreeing with Preston's point. Because these have to be on the ground floor for long-term parking, you're like, there's a lot of stuff that happens on a ground floor for a multifamily building. There's loading, there's trash, there's transformers, there's retail space, there's lobby. Sometimes there's a drive aisle, and it's like, it gets very difficult to fit everything. So when you have to then fit, and so like in a building that I'm looking at, building would be 96 interior parking spots for bikes. I mean, that's a lot. And then if you're thinking about like garden style apartments where like there's a bunch of different buildings, how would they do it? And it's like, it could end up, it could end up taking like upwards to 8 to 9 parking spots. And usually people are doing garden style with surface parks in areas that are less dense and where people are typically driving more. So that would be taking up like tons of parking spots with like these bike storage buildings that may not even be used.
Yeah, I get it. It's definitely a balancing act for sure. And it's a more onerous requirement for long term, clearly, than it is for short term, right?
This is Preston. I think we had Charlie next. Is that right? And then Philip, is that right? Did Jennifer skip you? Right. And then if we could maybe put a temporary again there, and then we'll offer some space to go to the next segment if that's okay. Great.
Hi, it's Charlie Minges. A couple of questions, kind of basic, maybe I've missed it somehow. But the number of required spaces for the short term and long term in commercial properties are those based on the patrons, what their needs are, or take office properties too, or the people that actually work there, the employees? How do they come up with these numbers? Are there somebody done studies of, you know, if you have an office?
No studies. They're just numbers based on another ordinance. I mean, you have to come up with a number from somewhere. And it's not like parking ratios, I would suggest, where if you really make a mistake with parking ratios, there's a lot of land left over. Maybe on the long term, we may be a little bit more refined on that number, but like it's pretty easy to provide short-term bike parking spaces, right? It's just a bike rack. It doesn't take up a ton of space.
Okay. And I'm going to skip over adult business. I have no idea how that was derived, but a more fundamental question. We keep talking about bicycles, but you know, it's not just the ordinary bicycle. They're motorized bikes. They're scooters, they're motorized scooters, and who knows what else may come down the line. And you know, there's an article in the New York Times recently about how the bike lanes in Manhattan, and this not directly related to what we're talking about, except that bike lanes were designed for bicycles as we think of them, you know. But now, you know, all these other things are filling those as well. So, you know, Richmond's not known for having scooters everywhere, but is this designed to provide parking spaces for those types of vehicles, not just the traditional bicycle?
I mean, if you can lock it up on a bike rack, then yeah.
Yeah, they're geometrically quite similar, Mr. Mingus.
Okay.
Anything further?
No.
Yeah, just Philip Hart, I want to observe that this applies not only to new construction, but to renovation. So I'm thinking of, there are places in Richmond, thinking of Carytown, where if a business owner were redeveloping a gut and redevelopment of a commercial storefront, it'd be very difficult to put bike racks. These are storefronts that are 15 feet from the street. There's no way you're going to be able to put bike racks in front of them, and they abut, you know, other businesses. There's just no room. There are no convenient alleyways between the buildings to put them in the space in the back. And I bet some of these commercial properties don't even have, you know, sole access to the areas behind them just because they're old. So I would hate for this to be an impediment to investment and new business development. So sorry to pose a problem without a solution, but it's a practical, I can think of a number of other neighborhoods in Richmond where this might be a problem for renovation and new business.
Jennifer,
Thanks for that.
and then let's perhaps move on to the next segment.
This is Jennifer Mullen. I think most of what I wanted to say has already been said, but I just would really encourage the location to frankly go away. The distribution throughout the site. And then also to piggyback on what Philip said is, you know, I do think that it is important to provide bicycle parking for commercial spaces, but think about alternatives of if there are bike racks within the public right of way, if you can use those on a block, because you also don't want to have the sidewalk you know, completely full of bike racks up and down, or maybe you do, but I think it just needs to be consistent with whatever our bicycle plan is. And then, you know, you have some regulations that are already DPW regulations, so I think you probably don't need to put that in the zoning ordinance.
Okay.
Ellen Robertson, parking is parking. We don't seem to be too concerned about parking the car, and we're willing to write that off. I think that we need to think how we talk. Let's be uniform with our demands of parking. I mean, certainly restrictions as it relates to where it's got to be located and all of those kinds of things create a problem. But I think, you know, in areas where we've got lots of bike lanes, maybe we need to look at what's involved in that whole process from a public perspective when we add in bike lanes, as to how we also make recommendations for opportunities for parking as it relates to where that infrastructure is in place. I think right now we are moving to a more biking city, but I can tell you there are too many people in the city that still feel like we've got more bike lanes than we have bikes on lanes. So to put another restriction in place that
Well-
would have an impact on the cost of development and businesses doing business in the city. I would be concerned of a restrictive requirement.
Yeah, it's definitely a balance. And so all we're trying to try and help with is if there are bike lanes and you do have the ability to ride safely, that when you get to your destination, there's somewhere to lock your bike up, either for a short period of time or a longer period of time. Because otherwise you might not use that bike lane if there's nowhere to lock your bike up when you get to the end.
Okay.
I wanted, as we move on, I wanted to say something
Okay.
about how we move on. Is that
Okay, yeah,
okay?
because we do need to
Yeah,
move on.
right.
We have 15 minutes before we're supposed to get to the next agenda item. So what's your comment?
Well, just as far as the rest of this document goes, there's a lot of, minutia that I think we could chew on for a long time and but one thing that I find to be particularly important is about the transitions, section 4.4, that speaks to concerns we've been hearing from various members of the public throughout this process, to the effect of like, I'm hearing a lot of people saying, I'm comfortable with the zoning designation applied upon my property, but immediately next door, there's this much greater density allowed, and there's concerns about transition. So I would advocate that we make time in the next meeting to focus on that in particular, since I don't think that's something that we can really dig into in 15 minutes.
I think that's a reasonable request. I think there's a lot here that we need to dig into and spend, and I'm sorry, this is Elizabeth, spend a lot of time on, and I don't want to rush it. So, Marianne, can we make sure that
I'm gonna put our director on the spot because he happens to be here, but many of the issues that have been identified and called out in the code are ones that come up as part of the typical site plan review process, building permit process. I'd love to just sort of hear from your perspective, the value of having clear standards set in the code versus flexibility afforded by having policies and procedures that are defined, hit the same topics, but aren't necessarily codified. Or if that's an issue that you need to ponder and get back to, I certainly respect that too.
So I'm probably, this is Kevin, PR director. So I think, as we're implementing the new site plan process, like I said, we'll probably revisit it in about 6 months. So maybe as we move along, a few months, have a better context in terms of like where we might have some sticking points. I think just in fairness, it's important whether or not codified or in policy that they're publicly available, right? Like a developer shouldn't have to guess things in terms of, right, how much you need or where things are at. So long as there is something, I'll say, to the best, if you want to be really stringent and strict about it, then codify it. And so if you are saying something like, I'll say bicycle parking, right, then say like shall be done in accordance, either put the standards in here, or if you feel like, hey, we don't know, put the standards published by PDR, DPW, or whoever, and it's at least those are out there and have some form of, I'll say just administrative approval in terms of, right, where you have that administrative discretion. So I think there's room for both in it. I think it's just, in clear in terms of like what we're codifying is important to just, for me, that's a policy direction, from ultimately like, right, from council that's saying, yep, these things are a priority and I don't see those changing too much fast. But where there's maybe some room for interpretation, sure, maybe we could have that in some administrative guidance.
I appreciate that. That is very thoughtfully stated, and I'll just conclude by saying my own personal perspective on that is that sections 4.2 and 4.3 concerning multimodal access and mobility, vehicle access and mobility, they're valuable. We should provide guidance to the development community on what our expectations are, but I think they could be sufficiently handled as a policy document rather than being codified in the code to allow the flexibility that we've talked about. And then perhaps to Damien's point, when it comes to transitions and screening, maybe that is a heightened level of policy importance that merits discussion in the code.
Yeah, I would just say, Kevin, one more time, I think maybe a good line is to say like, look, maybe this goes back right with sidewalks and connections. If the body feels, and I say the body again, ultimately, like this is adopted by council. If council says, right, it's important to have bike parking, and we say, you know, for commercial use, it's 5 bike parking spaces. But then there's some administrative discretion in terms of like where those are located or how those are located, or maybe they're in the public right around, right? There's some way to like figure out, right, for particular properties. The same thing with like sidewalks or access or connectivity. Like there should be, right, a connection from the door to the public right of way, but like not dictating exactly where that needs to be, understanding, right, because of site constraints and for a very old city with some very funky properties, that you can say, hey, all right, administratively, we can decide what is acceptable to meet the spirit and intent of.
So I'm gonna ask, and I know we've already talked about, and this is Elizabeth talking about having a dedicated time to talk about transitions and screenings at the next meeting. Colin, Renee, how would you like to spend next 40 minutes of our agenda, knowing that we're behind and we still have a lot to cover? What would you like to accomplish between now and the end?
What, Renee, what's remaining on the agenda?
I mean, there's
Oh, the
more
admin.
there's more development standards, and then there's the admin piece. The admin piece at the end here, we haven't drafted anything yet, so we're really just before we go and draft anything, we wanted to just talk to you about what the administrative provisions are going to cover, or what they could cover, and kind of get your high level feedback as to, you know, concerns you have or goals you have about where we should be getting with that. And some of that you've touched on already, I think, with discussing, talk about, administrative flexibility and so forth, and a few other items that have been, touched on in terms of how we interpret some of this, with site plan and whatnot. So we can talk some more about that. There's not a whole lot to put in front of you, though. It's more of just an open-ended conversation about where we go.
Okay, do we want to maybe wrap up with vehicle access and mobility and then jump into the administrative standards? Does that work for everyone? And Miriam, is this on the online?
It's online, looking at last month's meeting, underneath the August meeting, you'll find a copy of it.
Okay, and for the folks online, the development standards that we're reviewing is posted online. So I recommend taking a look at that and getting comments, particularly as we reserve more discussion in next meeting on transitions and screening. So Renee, Colin, do you think we can wrap up the vehicle access and mobility and then get to administrative?
Yeah.
Can I say one other, just in terms of commenting on it, there's going to be a revised version that's going to come out in November, taking in consideration your comments. Staff has additional comments as well. So there's going to be a revised version that the public will be able to comment directly on.
Great, thank you.
So just quickly then, so we have pedestrian access, making sure pedestrians can connect to the public realm. We want to make sure we're doing the same with vehicles. One of the things that we don't want is a whole bunch of driveways down a street on the same property, at least. So we have a very basic requirement here that has a minimum spacing between driveways on the same site, can be no less than 100 feet. So you can't do, this would be a larger property. You couldn't have a driveway closer than 100 feet between another driveway. And then what is the width of that driveway? So driveways can impact a pedestrian's ability to use the sidewalk and cross driveways. So in general, we're trying to get narrower driveways. Again, we want to balance this ability for vehicles to use the driveway and lessen the impact on pedestrians. So we've proposed limits on the number of driveway lanes and then the widths of those driveways themselves. And this would apply to single family in this particular instance. So single family would be a driveway serving up to 5 parking spaces. The minimum width of that driveway on a primary street would be 8 feet, but it can be no wider than 10 feet. And then on a side street, you can do a wider driveway. And so it is right now based on the number of parking spaces that driveway serves. That's the width, the minimum and maximum width the driveway can be. Any thoughts on that?
On the width or on the whole thing?
All of it, like, you know, should there be a driveway spacing requirement? Should we again be referencing another policy and procedure for driveway spacing? You know, for driveway width, should we be referencing somewhere else?
Oh, and this is Elizabeth. Pardon my ignorance, because again, I don't have a driveway. I don't know that I ever have since I lived in the city. A driveway serving up to 5 parking spaces for single family. So you're expecting 5 cars to be able to get into?
It's just, if you have a parking area that serves up to 5 parking spaces, that row would apply. I was just insinuating that single family for the most part would fit into that row. It doesn't necessarily mean single family has 5 parking spaces, if you get what I'm saying.
Not really.
Not really.
What I heard him say is that
Think of the rows as applicability.
could be that there's a single family house that has a massive driveway.
No,
Because they have
no.
a lot of cars, and then it could be wider.
So a single family house would typically fall into that first row, typically, right? Because it only has room for 2 parking spaces on site, or 3. So if you were just trying to figure out, does this apply to my single family house? You would just look at how many parking spaces are accommodated on site. And if it's 2, then it's the first row. If it's 6, it's the second row. Just remove the land use piece from that. Sorry.
Well, and it's Elizabeth Greenfield. I'm sorry if I'm making this difficult. I tend to do that
No.
a lot, but I'm reading, you know, every platted lot is allowed at least 1 driveway. I know our current ordinance, which we're obviously amending, says that not everyone can have a driveway. So now are we saying everyone can have a driveway, even if they have functional accessible alleys? Because that could really change neighborhoods and.
No. I guess if you have an alley, you have to use the alley.
There's
But that's not
conflict.
what this says.
There's conflict there with letter E on page 413. It says, this is where it says when you're adjacent to a primary street. But no, actually, never mind.
It is very confusing.
We'll clarify that, but the intent is if you have an alley, you need to use the alley if it's improved and usable. But if you don't have an alley, then you get at least 1 driveway. That's what it's supposed to say.
And that matches generally what we have right now.
Suburbia.
I think Jennifer has a question, then Brian, then Rita.
Yeah, this is Jennifer Mullen again. On the design standards, so for C, for driveways serving parking lots or structures with more than 6 or more spaces, it must be spaced at least 50 feet apart. What happens if you don't have that? And you need to have access on your parcel, and the next parcel over needs to have access, and you don't have that, you have to go get a special use permit?
Yeah. Okay.
So
Doesn't, if you scroll down though, Jennifer, sorry, I wanted to catch that, because if you scroll down, it looks like it says the city engineer may waive or vary the design standards that's indicated in this section based on et cetera. So there is
Yeah, no, and I see that, and that's sort of one of my comments sort of overall, which we can talk about with the administration. I would not have that in the zoning ordinance personally. Just because I think that's setting it up, particularly as you're developing, you know, there are different zoning regulations for the types of streets, which are, you know, already currently on where you can have access. So I think maybe you should think about it more in terms of those types of streets instead of artificially dictating a 50-foot spacing requirement.
Brian?
Yeah, the driveways serving up to 5 parking spaces. It's been my observation that most folks with driveways that lead to a garage use their garage for storage and park in the driveway. And if you've got say 3 cars in a household, it's not gonna fit in there. And I know people can park in the street. I'm just suggesting that perhaps that language might lead to some complaining that we would have to deal with.
This is my now. Okay. So on that, I think it's good to try and limit the conflict between pedestrians and cars exiting from parcels. Totally agree. I think that sometimes there are buildings there are places where there's more vehicles exiting than others. So like there might be a driveway access point that is needed in order to like empty a garbage container. And that might need to be on the same block face as where the one for the cars going in is, like the cars going to a parking lot. And so to say that like those are the same, like that both, if you have 2 curb cuts, because they both would be considered driveways, even if one of them's only going to access a dumpster, they're not the same, because like one of them is like coming like once a day and the other one might have like cars going in and out all day long. So like I don't know how to like manage that conflict, that sometimes it's not used very much. And it might be okay to have another curb cut because it's not used that often.
Yeah, Ellen Robertson, I'll go back to what I said from the beginning. Eliminate parking. And now we're talking about putting all parking on private property. So we still have issues with cars. Where do they park? And we still have issues with any other mode of transportation. And so now we want to put it on the private property of the business of the resident. And I just think that that's, if we want to be a city that don't require parking, then I don't think that we should put in the code. I mean, there's some standards perhaps that have to be met for a driveway if you want to put one in. But I think this, putting in the code certain things is really, and I think this should be subjected to the developer and the owner at the time that they do that. And if they want to put in a driveway, there are certain standards that has to be met from the city, but not in the code.
Yeah, we should talk this through with the city more. I mean, all we're trying to do is prevent somebody putting 5 driveways, 10 feet apart on the same site, which would be impactful to pedestrians. And maybe they won't do that.
Is the Maritza, Jennifer and Preston, who deal a lot with this, like, is this something that would even be possible, what he described? Doesn't DPW regulate whether or not you can have a curb cut? And they're pretty stringent, aren't they?
They follow Division 0 guidelines, which has as its North Star minimizing pedestrian vehicular conflicts. And so the fewer connection points that you have, access points that you have, the fewer conflicts you have, ergo, that presents itself in the site plan negotiation process is usually a comment to get rid of superfluous.
But at the same time, it's also to try to narrow things up. So, we've got potentially conforming to VDOT standards, which is just widening everything to make everybody go faster, which is different than what we're trying to do, I think, with Vision Zero. So I think having another conversation with the city and DPW, and that would be useful before we get too in the weeds with adding these components to the zoning ordinance.
Charlie, you've been waiting patiently. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, just wanted to reiterate, this might be a little more self-governing than we realized in this conversation, given that the site plan ordinance that just went into play even goes as far as to make it a trigger if you're altering entrances to property, regardless of what other things you might have going on in your property. So with that in the site plan process, DPW, especially on busier streets, it's maybe the first thing they're thinking about. So yeah, just reiterating that. I don't know if if this doesn't make it in the zoning ordinance, I don't think it's really that big of a blind spot in terms of how this is managed from a plan review standpoint.
Are there any other comments from the council on vehicle access? Because I think, Colin, you noted you probably need to have some, you, not me, more conversation with city staff and maybe look at other things like the site plan ordinance and Vision Zero, get other documents and policies that have been referenced before we continue to beat this up any further.
Okay, thank you. Those are great
Okay.
comments.
Any other council members? Charlie, you still have your hand up? Are you good? Are other members online? Anybody that hasn't weighed in? All right, I think we're the administrative piece.
All right, thank you. Just as I flip through these last few slides here about transition, and we're going to get back to that later on, just to note that for transition, this section laid out, which combinations of districts require a transition. And in speaking with the community, we heard from people feeling strongly about the RA district requiring transitions when it came up against the back of it came up against MX or other districts. So that's one topic we'll be revisiting for sure. But we'll talk more about this later on. So to the administrative provisions, just as a kind of overview for those who are not familiar, and I would say probably some people in the ZAC are very familiar with this, but this is the sort of the primarily text part of the zoning code that describes how it operates. And so administrative provisions in codes, they establish the authority in which the zoning code is established and the bodies that oversee it, the way that development applications are reviewed and approved, the process for amendments to the zoning code's text or map, the latter of which, when you change the map, it's also known as a rezoning. Rules for granting exceptions, and so those could be variances, those could be special use permits. There also could be room for minor discretionary modifications that could be granted by staff, which is something we've touched on a little bit today. And then how existing nonconformities are dealt with. So what are the rules in which case they're allowed and when they cease to be allowed. And then also how the zoning code is enforced and the penalties for violating it. So just a bit of a high level overview of some of the scope that this might cover. This is the last module here. And I would say, again, this is probably gets the least attention from members of the public compared to other parts of zoning codes. Although, again, I imagine some members of the ZAC have strong opinions about some of this. So just before we get into drafting content, I think we just at a high level just wanted to kind of put this out in front of you to see, for those who have dealt with the zoning code in your work, your life, are there administrative processes that you think could be made more efficient or effective? And for everybody else, including those who haven't dealt with the zoning code, generally what sort of outcomes would you like to see in terms of goals with the code's administrative processes in terms of, is it about speeding up development? Is it about, removing certain types of bottlenecks? Is it about maybe the opposite, giving people more restrictions or more opportunity for input? And I think aligned to all this is the topic of SUPs that we've talked about since the very beginning of this process. So I think we hope very much that the number of SUPs are going to be reduced in the future, just ipso facto, by the fact that we've been changing some of the standards for the zones and allowing some of those traditional neighborhood conditions that were being prohibited in some of the existing zoning districts. But we also wonder whether there's other ways that we might want to formally limit the scope of SUPs or not. I think this is a question to put in front of you. The role of SUPs going forward with the code. And then if you have any other suggestions related to administrative processes or things you'd like to see. So I'll just put this open to all of you guys.
This is Brian White. I would say the ability to build anything by right would be an enormous improvement, because other than a few single family areas, it's almost impossible to build anything by right in the city. But I would also ask that we be conscious of the balance between cost of housing in the city and the number and scope of responsibilities that we are adding to a property owner's responsibility list of things they have to do to develop a property. Because that stuff isn't free. And I know if they don't do it, the city has to do it, and there's a trade-off between taxes and cost of housing, but we're adding some stuff that's going to materially impact the cost of developing housing. I think it's stuff we ought to keep in mind.
Any other comments?
Really, yeah, I mean, just getting in the weeds. The Board of Zoning Appeals has special exceptions that currently specifically pertain to things that come up often, and they're usually relative layups, minimal side yard relief in a historic, part of the city where it's consistent. But hey, city, I don't want to build a 9-foot wide house. I'd like to get a special exception to do a 12-foot wide house, making it that much better, more compatible with the neighborhood. I'd like to see that same approach going forward with the new ordinances. It's hard to know what the special exceptions came about because it was based upon, the bad zoning, right? And then the bad zoning created these situations that just kept coming to the board multiple times over and over. So of course we can't really know what those are with an entirely new zoning ordinance, but it's going to be interesting once this gets approved, because it's going to be like maybe only variances at the BZA, right? Or it's hard to say what special exceptions currently on the books in section 1040.3 whatever are going to be able to carry forward and what they're going to latch onto. So it's like a big known unknown. That process, I would say, is maybe one of the best administered processes in the city of Richmond. It's got a specific deadline. You go to the meeting 6 to 8 weeks after that. It's the same time every month, same place every month, relative clockwork. So I like that. And on top of that, we have administrative variances, which are even lower on the totem pole in terms of threshold of need. They're like just as obvious, if not more obvious, of approvals. Usually the adjacent owners are the ones who get notified on that versus everyone within 150 feet. And if either of those neighbors voices opposition with a certain amount of time, then it goes to the full BZA for that request. So yeah, I like the BZA. I think to the extent we can set this up structurally as a document to make that be like the next step as things come up versus just saying, oh, well, guess you need a SUP. Like, I think we need to be monitoring as a city what those requests tend to be and very quickly make those available as special exceptions to the extent we can.
This is Preston Lloyd. I'll weigh in with an observation about other zoning ordinances that have tried to be overly prescriptive with the administrative process to the degree of actually specifying all the different documents that must be submitted in order for an application to be deemed complete. Once again, that creates challenges in these situations where there may be extenuating circumstances where a particular document may not be applicable, but because it's in the code, the planning department has no ability to waive that requirement. And so the more detail about the process that we put in code, the less flexible it'll make PDR and the director in trying to make calls about expediting the process when appropriate. And so again, I think we recognize that the administrative process comes at a cost. We want to make it as efficient as possible. There are also tools that have been created by enabling legislation in the Code of Virginia that give localities the option, but not the requirement, to put incentives in their code related to providing affordable housing. So if you provide a certain amount of affordable housing, then perhaps you go to the front of the line or you get a discount in your application fees, et cetera. And so again, that may be something for us to consider as we're prioritizing certain outcomes and policy decisions. How we administer the process can create alignment with those policy objectives. And finally, I'll note on a completely different topic with regard to the SUPs and how we evaluate that. That's largely driven by the city's, charter, which has to be amended by the General Assembly. And so any changes that we make in our code related to the SUP process and the authority of council to authorize those SUPs is probably going to require going across the street and saying Mother May I to the General Assembly. So just something to be aware of, that's an additional constraint regarding SCPs. Sorry, I did have one last observation. I was chatting with a colleague, getting a download on what are some of the things that haven't gone as smoothly as hoped with the Charlottesville ordinance that was adopted. And the observation that I got is one that I think is going to be really relevant to Richmond. Some of the places where the form-based code that they adopted in that jurisdiction, it didn't contemplate in the non-conforming use section situations where you have an adaptive reuse of a project for a completely different use, but it's only being changed interior to the structure, but it's a change in the use of the structure. And so that's now requiring those applications to be reviewed under form standards that a non-conforming project doesn't currently meet. And so it's basically forcing everything into what in the city of Richmond would be an SCP lane, where they now have to take a project through that should have been by right simply because the non-conformity provisions didn't contemplate an adaptive reuse to a new use. And so something that I'll flag just to be cognizant of as you're coming up with those administrative requirements.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Food for thought for the,
Does this, would this include any affordable dwelling unit ordinances, or are we putting that under supplemental regulations?
It's a good question. I mean, I think that we had talked before about that actually being under development standards, possibly. So we're still.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we may come back to that. Again, we're still kind of waiting for some input from the city attorneys about what they think we can do. So it could either go there, or it could go, it could be baked directly into districts too. I mean, there are codes that have, if you look up the district, it'll tell you, the basic standard and the bonus.
Okay. Yeah, the reason I ask is like, if it's living here, it's probably worth discussing. We currently do have an affordable dwelling unit density bonus program.
Yes.
It's notoriously not really utilized ever for a variety of reasons. Some of those reasons I do think could be tweaked that wouldn't, Preston, affect the current permissions under 2305, I think, the Virginia State Code, one that we're under. Things like amount of time you have to stay in the program, registered with the city or what have you. So just that's one that I think could be improved to the extent it can within the General Assembly's enabling legislation for the city of Richmond's permissions. The affordable dwelling unit density bonus program, purely from an administrative standpoint, not from a what can it do standpoint.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, one last question that Charlie prompted. Will there be a PUD district or process akin to what we currently have as the community unit plan ordinance in the code?
To be determined? What are your thoughts on that, Preston?
I'm agnostic. If the answer is no, it's going to require some intentionality on the nonconformity piece, because effectively you're going to have a body of regulation. It's an overlay district that allows you to write your own code and have your own zoning, but it's no longer going to be compliant with the underlying district regulations. And to amend that, you're going to have to basically go through a process. You're not going to be able to bring it into compliance, in other words, in making simple amendments. So there's a lot of unintended consequences that could be there. And that's hyper specific, and I apologize for raising it cold, but there are a number of significant properties that the city has identified for redevelopment that are subject to a PUD. And it's going to be really complicated if that CUP process no longer exists to try to figure out what you do in that scenario. Like, how do you make changes?
Well, it sounds like we need to circle back to discuss nonconformities a little bit more, maybe with you. Just, I'm not sure I fully understand what's going on in Charlottesville, so I would like to kind of at some point.
I think I'm the messenger in that regard, but we can connect you with the right person to share some lessons learned.
Yeah, that'd be really helpful.
Yeah, we're trying to reach out to James Frias again from Charlottesville to talk about lessons learned since it's been implemented as well.
Been on vacation.
any other council members have questions for Colin or Renee? Is there anything else, Colin, Renee, any other information that you have or that you want to present?
Nothing further right now unless we want to go back and talk about any development standards again. But no, this is really just about collecting high level feedback before we start trying to put something together on administrative processes.
I think that considering our meeting ends at 6:30 and that the development standards tends to be a lengthy discussion topic, I don't know that we would have time to get into anything meaningful. So I'm gonna say no.
All right.
He's nodding heads in agreement with me here, so we will hold that until the next meeting. All right, there's nothing else. Just want to remind folks that the next council meeting is October 8th at 4 p.m. here in the 5th floor conference room of City Hall. And the draft zoning map and district regulations are available on the city's code refresh page, and comments are due by September 28th. Anybody else before we adjourn? All right, we're adjourned. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Yep.